There are houses in this world that the living leave behind, but something else never does. In the old, rotting district of Harrowfield, on the crumbling north end of Ashgate Road, there stood one such house, and inside it, something ancient was keeping itself very, very young.
The Spritvox. It's alive.
There is a stretch of Ashgate Road in Harrowfield, England, where locals still cross to the other side of the street, not because of traffic, not because of construction, because of the house. It sits behind iron gates that have not opened in decades. The garden, if you can still call it that, is choked with black-stemmed weeds and overgrown hedges that block out the lower windows entirely. The building itself is massive, 4 stories of gray limestone, ornate carvings above every arch, marble steps leading to a front door that no postman has knocked on in years. The name etched above the entrance reads, Whitmore Hall. People in Harrowfield knew the name, of course. Everyone did, not because of the building, because of the woman inside, Vivienne Ashcroft. Once, she was the most famous face in British cinema. In the 1950s and 60s, her name on a film poster guaranteed a packed theater. Critics called her luminous. Directors called her untouchable. The press called her simply the Queen. But that was a long time ago. No one had seen Vivienne Ashcroft in public for nearly 30 years. No interviews, no appearances, no confirmed sightings. Every few years, a tabloid would run a grainy telephoto shot of a figure standing at an upper window of Whitmore Hall, and that would be enough to sell papers for a week. What people didn't talk about, at least not openly, was what happened near that house after dark. Dogs wouldn't go near it. That much was established fact, not superstition. Residents on the block had noticed it for years. A dog would be walking calmly down the pavement, reach a point directly in front of Whitmore Hall's gates, and simply stop, hackles raised, a sound somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Then the animal would pull its owner in the opposite direction and refuse to look back. No birds nested on the roofline. No cats cut through the garden, though stray cats were common in that part of Harrowfield. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like something inside it was holding its breath. Vivienne Ashcroft was 94 years old. Her solicitor, a careful man named Gerald Holt, who had handled her affairs for the last 2 decades without ever once meeting her face to face, confirmed this in the council records. Born March 1931 in Surrey. One of 11 official film credits between 1952 and 1969. No living relatives on record. No domestic staff on the payroll since 1998. The estate tax filings came in every year, signed in her own hand, in a script that had grown increasingly thin and spidery, but remained unmistakably hers. No one from the outside world came to Whitmore Hall. No groceries were delivered. No GP had visited in over a decade. There was a single standing order from her bank account, a monthly direct debit to a private supplier in Eastern Europe, whose registered company name translated, roughly, to botanical extracts and ceremonial compounds. Gerald Holt had queried it once, years ago. She had replied in a single sentence, "It is not your concern." He had not asked again. What the neighbors described, on the rare occasions anyone brought it up, were sounds. Not screaming, not voices. Something more structured than that. A rhythm. Low, repetitive, like a chant recited just below the threshold of hearing. It came from somewhere deep inside the house, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. It had been going on, according to the oldest residents of Ashgate Road, for as long as anyone could remember. One retired nurse who had lived across the street for 40 years told her daughter she believed it had started sometime in the late 1980s. Shortly after, she said, was when Vivienne Ashcroft had stopped being seen at all, and shortly after that was when the garden had died. Nobody connected these things officially. People in Harrowfield were practical. They had jobs and children and electric bills. The old actress in the crumbling manor was not their problem, until the council made her their problem. The Harrowfield Borough Council had been receiving structural concern reports about Whitmore Hall for several years, subsidence along the east wall, a partially collapsed interior ceiling reported by a utility inspector who had been granted access to check a gas meter in 2019. His written report described the interior as, quote, "unlike anything I have encountered in 30 years of inspections, and I would not re-enter that property without police presence." The council had written to Vivienne Ashcroft 4 times. They had received 4 replies, each one legally precise, each one dismissing their concerns. Her solicitor had backed her up each time. But in the spring of that final year, something shifted. A section of the rear foundation had given way. The property now posed a danger not just to its occupant but to the adjoining terraced houses. The council issued a formal compulsory vacation order. Whitmore Hall was to be vacated within 30 days. Gerald Holt telephoned the house, one of the few people alive who had the number, and expected, as usual, either no answer or a brief, cold dismissal. Instead, Vivienne Ashcroft answered on the second ring. Her voice, he would later tell people, was not what he expected. He had braced for the voice of a very old woman, thin, frail, perhaps confused. What he heard was clear, precise, with an odd quality he struggled to describe. Not young exactly, but not aged either. Suspended somehow between states. She told him she understood. She said she would leave. She asked for no extension, made no legal threats, lodged no appeal. She simply said she would go, and she would not be returning. Holt thanked her and hung up. Then he sat in his office for a long time without doing anything, though he could not afterwards explain why. 3 weeks later, at 11 in the evening, a long black Rolls-Royce was brought to the front gate of Whitmore Hall by a driver. Holt had arranged the same private car hire company he used for all her rare appointments. The driver, a professional who prided himself on his discretion, waited at the gate as instructed. He heard the front door of Whitmore Hall open. He heard slow footsteps on the marble stairs. He did not see a 94-year-old woman emerge from those gates. What he described seeing, and would describe again to police 2 days later, was a woman draped in a long pale coat, moving steadily, unhurriedly, with a posture that he would only call commanding. Her face was turned away from him as she got into the back seat. He had the impression, he said, of dark hair, of pale skin, of a woman who was not old. He did not question it. He got behind the wheel and drove. The road connecting Harrowfield to the motorway cuts through 5 miles of unlit countryside before reaching the first roundabout. There are no streetlights on that stretch, no houses, just farmland on both sides, and the occasional passing lorry. At approximately 11:47 that night, a lorry driver traveling south saw headlights coming toward him in the northbound lane, moving at what he estimated to be well over 100 miles per hour. He had only a second to react. He veered onto the hard shoulder, scraped the crash barrier, and brought his vehicle to a stop with his hazards on and his heart slamming against his ribs. He looked in his mirrors and saw the headlights veer sharply, leave the road, and disappear. He called 999 immediately. Police and paramedics arrived to find the Rolls-Royce on its roof in the ditch running alongside the field. The driver had been thrown clear of the vehicle through the windscreen. He was alive, but unconscious, with serious injuries. The rear passenger door had been forced partially open, either by the impact or from inside. When paramedics reached the back seat, they stopped. They called for the senior officer on scene. The senior officer arrived, looked into the rear of the vehicle, and immediately requested that the area be cordoned off and that no photographs be taken by anyone without authorization. Because the person in the rear seat of the car, the person who had been loaded into that vehicle at Whitmore Hall as a 94-year-old woman, was not 94 years old. She appeared to be in her mid-20s. Long dark hair, pale, flawless skin, no lines, no age, a face that belonged to someone who had never grown old. She was wearing the same pale coat, she was not breathing, and she did not have any identification on her person. The forensic pathologist's preliminary report, delivered the following morning, estimated the deceased to be between 23 and 26 years of age at the time of death. Gerald Holt, when reached by telephone by a detective constable from Harrowfield CID, said nothing for a very long time. Then he asked if he could call back. He never did. When council contractors entered Whitmore Hall the following week, they were accompanied by 2 police liaison officers, as standard procedure had been updated after what had been found at the crash scene. What they found inside Whitmore Hall is not, even now, fully documented in any public record. What has been confirmed through the council's internal communications, portions of which were later obtained under Freedom of Information requests, is the following. The interior of the house was in advanced decay everywhere except for 2 rooms on the upper floor. Those 2 rooms were spotlessly maintained. The floors were clean. The walls were bare except for a large antique mirror in one room, floor to ceiling, ornately framed and completely intact despite everything else around it having crumbled. The mirror faced a low wooden table on which sat several unlabeled glass vessels, all empty. The contents had evaporated or had been used. On the wall beside the mirror, scratched directly into the plaster in a handwriting that matched Vivienne Ashcroft's known signature on legal documents, were what appeared to be instructions. The language was not English. It was not any language the attending officer could identify. The second room contained a wardrobe. Inside the wardrobe were clothes, not the clothes of an old woman. They were organized by decade, styles that ranged from the early 1960s through to what appeared to be current fashion, as though the wardrobe's owner had been tracking years passing, not through aging, but through changing what she wore to look like she belonged in them. The large antique mirror was the only item removed for further examination. It was taken to a storage facility operated by the council. Within a week of its arrival, 2 members of staff at that facility had requested transfers to other departments. Neither gave a formal reason in writing. The mirror remains in storage. No auction has been arranged. No museum has claimed it. As far as anyone official is concerned, it is simply an uncatalogued item from a condemned property. Nobody goes near it. The driver recovered after 6 weeks in hospital. He gave his statement, answered every question, and then quietly moved away from Harrowfield. He has not spoken publicly about that night. There are people in town who still walk past Whitmore Hall. The building is condemned now, gates padlocked, orange hazard tape strung across the entrance. The structural work has stalled pending further investigation. Nobody is in a rush to demolish it. On some nights people say, you can still hear it. The rhythm. The low, repetitive sound from somewhere deep inside the building that is supposed to be empty. The council says it is probably pipes, settling foundations, wind finding gaps in the damaged walls. The people of Ashgate Road do not argue with this explanation. They just cross to the other side of the street. Vivienne Ashcroft was 94 years old. That is what the records say. That is what the death certificate says. Nobody has looked too closely at the numbers. Some things, once you start pulling at the thread, don't stop unraveling. If this story made you feel like something is watching you from just out of frame, you're not alone. Leave a comment below. Tell us your experience. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we have more stories. And some of them are closer to home than you'd like.